Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Not So Mainstream. And today I have with me Memoir-Aziz, who is a lawyer, writer, and a former foreign policy advisor. And his first book, a memoir, is coming out this April titled Brown Boy, which is very exciting for him as well as for everyone who is following his work. So, to start with, Omar, you have so many accomplishments in your career, and your work is very global. But I want to know, like, aside from that, who is Memoir-Aziz as a person and what drives you to do what you are doing right now?
Who am I? I'm basically the person that you encounter in the book and who you see in person and who you see in front of you. You can see probably some of these notes. I usually don't do Zooms here. I do it by my books, but I was just working today. I'm a writer. I'm creating, I'm telling stories, I'm trying to piece things together, I'm trying to make a case, I'm trying to be out in the world in politics as well, trying to shape the world, make it a better place. So I'm hungry to do that. But ultimately, I get up in the morning and I want to be a really good writer. So a lot of what I do is tailored towards that and geared towards that. And you don't honestly hear that too often. Everyone wants to be an influencer, everyone wants to be famous, everyone wants to be this, they want to be on social media. But really, for me, every single day, I just want to be a good writer. I want to learn more. I want to get better. Even now with my book coming out, look, like 3 days it's coming out, and that's what I'm thinking of, right? I'm still thinking of like how I can be better. So that's what really motivates me and drives me. The things that I like to do, like, are pretty simple. I like going to the gym. I like going for walks. I like reading. I like learning again. I like good movies. I'm at Harvard right now, so just being around universities and thinkers, I like that. Like people who are thinking for themselves. Yeah, I don't really like wasting my time, basically.
That's great. Good to know. And I think it shows in your work as well. So, with reference to just this recent article that I read about you, Queens, you are a Queens alumni as well. So, the journal, like the article title was The Journey of an Outsider. I want to know, like, why did you feel like an outsider at the time? And do you feel same now where you are? And what impact does it have on your overall professional experience?
Yeah, I think I'll probably always feel like an outsider to some extent, just because it wasn't like I grew up, my family had done, had academic degrees or they had pedigrees or backgrounds. So I had to learn a lot of that for the first time out in the world, right? When you're like a child of immigrants. But yeah, for sure, I feel like an outsider. I mean, there aren't many books that are published about brown people by brown people in America and in the world, right? So Brown Boy is one of them. So already I'm an outsider. And then in many of the rooms that I'm in, they're still predominantly white. In almost all the rooms that I'm in, actually. So it's not that I feel like an outsider, it's I am an outsider. I feel like I belong, but I am an outsider. I know I'm an outsider. And that's very apparent by how these institutions are. Maybe next future generations won't, but I'm definitely still an outsider. And I think that gives me an edge and that gives me fire in my belly to kind of keep going always, right? Like to always prove myself and keep proving myself as well. So that's a really good, it's a gift. I was talking to a friend last night who is from a good friend of mine, Lee Hawkins, who's a journalist from America. But we were talking about how even when you're a person of color, like that can be a great privilege. When you come from a minority background or a working class background, it can be a great privilege. Why? Because you see how ordinary people live. You see an accurate portrait of the world. You see how power relations, you see things that are unfair. You see how the world really works. You don't live sheltered. So maybe we are the ones who are privileged, right? When we enter these spaces, because we have a mindset and what we have seen has strengthened us, right? And even what our parents went through, it strengthened them. They've got immense faith and strength. So I'm sometimes flipping many of these concepts on their head now. So, and really reflecting, because I am at Harvard. I'm obviously worked for prime minister and deputy prime minister, and then have this book coming out too, but I still have to reflect on what society is at, and is it good enough for my nephews and people who are coming up? My answer is no. We have a lot more work to do.
True. And I really like how you framed the whole concept of being an outsider and, taking it as a privilege and also like learning to be strong through that. That's pretty amazing. So that brings me to a question about what so many organizations are doing right now to incorporate all of these concepts such as like equity, diversity, inclusion, in order to like their aim and goal is to bring like the sense of belonging for everyone who might feel like as an outsider. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's enough? What's missing, or what could be done in a better way? What are your thoughts on that?
So we don't just need equity, we also need equality of opportunity in the workplace. We don't just need inclusion, we also need individuality. People who think different, who look different, right? And we don't just need diversity, we need desegregation, which means not just diversity for diversity's sake. We need to desegregate, which was the original term, right? And maybe it's a more uncomfortable term. Now, what do I mean by all this? I mean that we cannot just have performative changes and just have these concepts and buzzwords, anti-racism training, in diversity and inclusion. I mean, I've seen panels where you've got 5 white men and 5 white women on it, and they call it diverse. So what does that word mean? Like, how do you define diverse? So I think it's good to be thinking of, but we need to think a little bit harder and really reflect on what these terms mean and what we need to achieve. Personally, I want material diversity. I want actual boardrooms to look diverse, like different kids from working class communities there, from racialized communities, from backgrounds, LGBT, obviously all on merit though, right? You still have to work hard, you still have to accomplish things, you still have to do all of that. Nothing's ever given to you. We understand that. But at the same time, we need to be able to make space for people who are talented and extremely competent, because minorities often, when we're in positions of power or we're in these historically white dominated rooms, we have worked twice as hard to get there. So we're already competent. It's not a question of it, and some people over credentialize themselves. But I just think we need to actually make space and make room and stop talking about it. That's what I actually think, because look, we've been talking about this for a long time. Maybe since the 60s, we've been talking about race equality and voting and opportunities. And I just think now for elites, brown people, black people, white people, people of color and white people who are elites and in these dominant institutions, to stop talking and to start actually making progress on it. That's what I think.
That's really powerful.
I'm not interested in the black square anyone posts. I'm interested when they're in the boardroom and they have to make a hiring decision, and a very competent, extremely capable, extremely credentialed young brown or black applicant comes in, that they're aware that you have to interview them. You can't talk to them about your weekend trips to the cottage, for example, and how you're having beers with your buddies, because that's an experience that they will not be able to relate to, and you will unconsciously penalize them. So I think having greater awareness and learning about that is good. But the time for talk on this is done. The time for posting black squares on social media is done. It's the time to actually have progress. I think we're quite delayed. And unfortunately, whenever we do have progress, it's often by people of color, usually led by Black Americans on the street protesting. And that's what it takes. And what I'm saying, hopefully with this book, is we can have normal conversations about these subjects. Like, they're only sensitive subjects for white people most of the time. They're not sensitive for us. We're always talking about them, right? So let's have these conversations out and open in the public.
That's true. And I also agree with the point that you made about, it's been so much delayed. Like the whole action thing is, we have to walk the talk, as we say, just stop talking about the concepts, but also implementing those concepts.
Yeah.
Amazing. Right. So this question is kind of I'm gonna share my short experience as well that I had. I'm also from Queens, and one thing that I experienced over there was not particularly as me, as an outsider, but I had that experience. So what stood out to me was that as a Pakistani Muslim writing about our experiences, it's the narrative that is missing. Most of the times it's been taken as from a South Asian lens and not necessarily from a Pakistani lens. That's what I have experienced. And for example, I was in one of these courses, and we were having discussions about a very prevalent topic at the time. And the incident was a U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and its impact, how it's going to impact the future policies and everything. And during all that conversation, the point of view of Pakistan, that was missing. Nobody even mentioned the name of the country that is a very significant.
Did you mention it?
I did. That's how I tried to incorporate that in the conversation. But I felt really, as an outsider, I felt that these future scholars, they don't even recognize that it's important. So why do you think, what is, in your opinion, that gap exists? And taking into account your book, like how will that highlight it?
Well, in the example that you gave, on the one hand, your presence there brought that issue to light, right? That's good. That's a literal argument for why we need diversity, because someone from a different perspective brings that to light. But also that at the same time, that cannot be that, no offense, but that group of people cannot be too intellectually serious, in my view, if you ignore Pakistan and you're discussing the withdrawal of Afghanistan, because Pakistan was in the news, Musharraf was in the news, they called it AFPAC, $1 billion, Taliban. So you're getting a very, like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan if you're talking about Afghanistan, but you're not talking about Pakistan? Like, I'm sorry, but that's just a very intellectually unsophisticated and oversimplified view of it. It's just, it doesn't matter the race of the people in this case. It's just, that's not a very serious thing. If it was happening here in front of me in Harvard, I would say the same thing. I would say that's a bit of a joke, actually. If you're talking about Afghanistan, the US withdrawal, and you're not talking about Pakistan. I mean, where was bin Laden found? Again, it's so ridiculous, I don't even really want to entertain the point that much. But thank you for mentioning Pakistan in that case. What was your question again?
So, like, how do you think that, why that gap exists? Like, one thing that you mentioned is like, obviously intellectually, those.
Okay, I'll tell you.
Yeah,
because Pakistan, even though Pakistan is part of the subcontinent in India and it was one country and one history, we and they, we being ourselves and they being outsiders, have done everything to divide us, right? And if you think of the narrative of Pakistan and South Asia after 9/11, especially in the 2000s, it was basically like, India is good. It's an economic story. Manmohan Singh is there. It's a good story, economic story. Remember, Bush and Manmohan Singh signed a nuclear agreement in 2008, actually. It was like a new alliance, whereas Pakistan was like the bad boy. Pakistan was kind of in Afghanistan. It was taking US dollars. It was run by a military dictator, Pervez Musharraf. It was unstable. It has nuclear weapons. So in the American and Western Orientalist, you could say, imagination, it was kind of like Pakistan Muslim bad, India secular yoga good. Now, obviously, there's some truth to Pakistan's support of, let's just say, unsavory elements when it comes to India. But from a strategic perspective, you have to take it into account. From a storytelling perspective now, over the last 20 years, writers of fiction from Pakistan, as you know, whether we talk about Mohsin Hamid, whether we talk about Muhammad Hanif, whether we talk about, it doesn't really matter, but the same themes of kind of terrorism are coming up. The same themes of suicide bombing are coming up. So we were kind of very confined. I mean, Mohsin Hamid did a very good job, but even still, Reluctant Fundamentalist in Exit West, it's constantly like this backdrop of terrorism and carnage and violence. So I think we didn't have, like, Pakistani writers and then diasporic writers from the subcontinent, from Pakistan in particular, didn't have the same permission to opine on other issues or write about other issues, because whether you write an article of journalism or you go do a book proposal or you write a fiction, if Osama bin Laden is found in Abbottabad and that's all everyone is talking about, you're going to get asked about it, right? So that, I think that's changing now. One final thing I was thinking of the other day, I was just thinking, for the first time in my life now, I feel like I'm living in a post 9/11 age. Like, I'm living in a post 9/11 world in myself. Like, I'm thinking about other issues. Usually I'm thinking about China and literature and history. I don't feel like constantly crammed by the events of 9/11. It's not like you see constantly videos of, like, bin Laden or terrorism, and all the time white people coming and giving opinions of how Muslims are backwards. So I have a little bit more breathing room, I feel. And obviously the US has withdrawn from Afghanistan as it entered, so it left, and that period of history, at least from where I sit right now, it's not over for me, but I'm happy to be thinking about other things, and maybe that also speaks of a certain kind of privilege. But for a long time, I was 11 when 9/11 happened, and for a long time I've been living under the weight, and many of us have, of constantly thinking about it too, feeling it and thinking about it all the time. It's like, also when our families get together, they start talking about Pakistan, Afghanistan, what's happening, politics. So having the space and the freedom to think about other things, I think that's beautiful. And hopefully the kids who are coming up, their world, the world that we're building, doesn't involve so much war and trauma for Muslims, that they can grow up not thinking about this as well.
That's true, and I agree. Like 9/11 had become a point of reference for every conversation, and in the room. So, and I'm happy to hear that you feel that it's changing. And do you think that?
But I do want to say, I do want to say, like, even saying that, a person living in Syria can't say that. A person living in Iraq today can't say that. But hopefully we begin to move forward and move on. I went to Pakistan. I visited my relatives there the first time as an adult in October 2021. And even there, it was like people weren't worried about bombings and suicide bombings in Islamabad and stuff. They've moved on too. So I think everyone kind of agrees that it was just a horrendous period of war and bloodshed and bad decisions. And hopefully we learn a lot from it and we never forget that it happened, but we learn from it and we improve and never do it again.
Yeah, I totally second your point of view over there. So what about like your book? What do you think, not just like in terms of like current affairs, but the theme of your book? Like how does it add to the narrative from the context of like being, brown, people of color, or Pakistani, Muslim? Like how does it add to the whole narrative of new things that we are bringing to literature or writing industry?
Well, it depicts, a Pakistani Muslim family on the eve of 9/11 from the perspective of someone in that world. It shows the reader the world from the perspective of not just a child, but a Muslim child, right? Like when you're reading the first few pages. I don't think that's been done before. Both the fear, the curiosity, the imagination. And it also shows people these worlds of Harvard and Yale and Prime Minister's office, and not just from the perspective of, someone who would be born with the right to enter that space, if you know what I mean, but who's someone like me who went through a very dark and circuitous journey around many booby traps and many potential nightmares to get to that space in that room. You get what I'm saying? And then to show the reader that as well, to show them the UN, to show them the Prime Minister's office, to show them Yale Law School. So I think that's something that I have never seen before. I think this is going to be a reference point to its own.
Amazing. That sounds really great. So thank you for like writing that and bringing that into attention. So there we got into some deep discussion, but let's go on a lighter note. And I want to know what's next for you and what are your plans in terms of like your career or anything you want to leave us with that could help people who are watching, who just like who feel like an outsider or who doesn't like to feel like an outsider, anything for them.
Yeah, well, to answer that first, I would say you should read as much as possible, because I think reading gives you knowledge or it gives you a perspective of the world, and therefore you expand your mind and you can see the world clearly. Because when you're born as a person of color or as an immigrant, the world is not in your favor, right? The power relationship, if you think of when you get off the plane, like how much you have to learn. I think of my mother when she came here, in her late 20s as an immigrant, and then had me, and I'm writing about this actually right now, a piece on Scarborough that's going to be in the Globe and Mail this weekend. But I would say read and learn as much as possible. You need, because knowledge is power. And so with each book that you learn, you will actually become more powerful and be able to deal with the world as it is, and then be able to shape the world. And isn't that powerful, that it all just comes down to this, into this God-given brain that we have, as my dad used to say. So that's very powerful. You don't need money. A library card costs $1, $2. You don't need money. You don't need, a Harvard degree to do it either. You don't need anything. Now you can learn so much off YouTube, which also wasn't around that much when I was in university, right? You can learn so much on YouTube, ebooks, it's all there for you. So the better that you can use technology and use books and learn and reflect and educate yourself, the more power an outsider will have. And next thing you know, people will be coming to you to get your opinions, What's next for me? Well, is right now what I'm doing. I'm launching this book in 3 days. So by the time this comes out, maybe the Brown Boy will already be out. So listeners can go and get the book, Brown Boy Memoir, wherever books are sold. But for me, I'm working on my second book right now. That's where these notes are on fascism. I'm doing this podcast as well. I just edited or interviewed Bob Woodward, the great journalist. So I'm dropping that soon. I'm coming home to launch my first book. So I guess that's significant. And yeah, just continuing, like what I said at the beginning of the interview, I want to keep writing. I want to keep improving. I want to tell an even better story with the next book. I want the next book is really what I'm focusing my energies on soon. And again, to keep improving myself and to keep proving myself. And I think I owe it to that to my readers and listeners, and just to kind of just keep getting better and stay focused.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing such an amazing, messages and your narrative and about the book. I really, really appreciate your time today. I will also put a link in the description for your book so that people can go and, purchase it. And yes, thank you once again for the time. And I had such a good conversation and I learned a lot. And I hope the same for all of us, all of those who are watching us. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Zoha.